The individual in the Internet age. The acceleration of history is accompanied by the multiplication of news. We live in a time where the range and speed of news distribution, primarily via the Internet, leads to a glut of news of all kinds. We are used to expecting the next crisis every day: economic, political, health, war. Due to the constant flow of news, there is little opportunity for reflection. This is the time of proliferation of immediate content like videos, which require a minimum of interpretation. The fact that most of this video content are short and trivial, tuned for a short attention span and small ability for interpreting also contributes to this. You can't go on a social network or YouTube without being immediately presented with a non-stop stream of pet videos. This is predominantly a time of displaying, not of pointing out, indicating and interpreting. We don't need to wait for tomorrow's newspaper to find out what happened today. We find out about events just half an hour or an hour later. We don't need to search for, buy or borrow different newspapers in order to familiarize ourselves with several different reports about an event because we can do it through news portals and social networks in 15 minutes. We don't need to talk to people to find out what others think about an event because we can find out about it through comments on websites. At any moment we can photograph what we see without having to skimp on film because we have space for thousands or tens of thousands of photos at our disposal. We can record everything we see and save or publish that recording. Access to Google Maps allows us to move sovereignly even in cities we are in for the first time, mostly without the need to ask passers-by for directions. Asking someone where a certain street is today seems almost romantic. After work, today's man spends several hours on social networks where he is drawn into a continuous flow of news, short videos, comments, and generally passively, indiscriminately simply consumes this information mesh, which consists mainly of trivia, thereby constantly keeping his attention occupied, which prevents him from deeper reflection. Of course, there is valuable and educational content on social networks and YouTube that would otherwise be difficult to access. For example, all photos and early or generally historically significant documentary videos as well as lecture recordings. Edmund Husserl wrote that, quote, "Every subject is the bearer of a subjective world, a subjective way of presenting the world." In today's time, which almost every individual has access to an inexhaustible amount of diverse content that he can receive at his discretion, in terms of its type, duration, frequency, each individual is thus the bearer of a subjective way of presenting the world. One listens to personal development podcasts and motivational speeches, another watches videos about conspiracy theories, the third follows the channels of automotive hobbyists, the fourth watches historical documentaries, the fifth follows YouTube channels on technology topics, the sixth watches gardening videos, the seventh consumes content about cryptocurrencies. Television is an antiquated medium that is received sporadically, mostly to the extent that its contents can be found on YouTube and social networks. The massive proliferation of content coupled with the widespread availability of that content has allowed individuals to create their own worlds by exposing themselves only to content that interests them. 25 years ago, if you wanted to watch a movie, excluding the option of renting a cassette from a video club or going to the cinema, if it was being shown at that time, you had to find out about the television program to find out which channel it was on what day and at what time, and then plan to be in front of the TV at that time to watch that movie linearly without the ability to fast forward or rewind. If the film was considered significant, valuable, or popular, you could expect that some of your acquaintances had seen it. There were several TV series that were shown at certain times, on certain days. There was therefore much less video content and its availability was much more specific in terms of time. Therefore, the percentage of people exposed to a TV series of the same content was much higher than, for example, at the beginning of the previous decade. The scope of the commonality in this regard was much greater. If you go back even further in the past, when there were fewer TV channels, this circumstance was even more pronounced. It was enough for the musician to appear a couple of times on national television in the 70s so that half of the population of that country knew about him. Because the amount of video content was incomparably smaller, people had a lot less choice about what video content they would consume, what they would spend time on. At the same time, they were less saturated with media content. Today there is a huge amount of content whose creators and distributors are competing with each other for the limited time and the limited attention span of the audience. That is the raison d'etre of social networks, occupying people's attention and time. In a time of so much proliferation and availability of content, a time in which content is so cheap, in which a monthly internet subscription, at the same time Wi-Fi is free in many public places, and the price of electricity needed to power a computer and a mobile phone or tablet allow access to the amount of content that is limited only by the free time an individual can spend on it. The time of focused attention has become a currency. What do companies which advertise through social networks pay for? The number of hours of human attention that can potentially be directed to their service or product. That is what these networks offer them, a certain number of hours of human attention in a day or week. We live in a time of great dissipation of attention and at the same time marked indiscriminateness in terms of the content on which that attention is directed. If social networks and most news portals were to be deactivated for a month, it would be like waking up after a drunken binge. Many individuals are intoxicated by the constant stream of content they are exposed to, and possibly are addicted to it. In this deluge of content, the content that is able to reach a huge number of people is often the one in the shortest form, the meme. Catchy, short, photo or GIF with a very short text. Memes today serve as mediators of meaning for many consumers of internet content, a form that does not require more than 5 to 10 seconds to be received and understood. Concise, effective, often witty. Someone sends you a meme, you look at it, and as a rule, you quickly understand the point of some political, social, cultural, or pop cultural comment or just some witticism. Many people seem to have become addicted to consuming a continuous sequence of short information stimuli, which manifests itself in a practice called mindless scrolling. Mindlessly scrolling through a stream of content, posts, comments, short videos. It is as if they have a great hunger for such stimuli which they cannot satisfy. They don't scroll through those content threads looking for something specific. It is about passively receiving content, mostly indiscriminately, which only stimulates empty, aimless curiosity or temporarily dispels boredom. Since in this activity the individual is not looking for anything specific, for any specific knowledge or insight, that activity cannot bring satisfaction to his spirit. The individual has access to a very powerful information distribution system, a huge amount of content, but mostly uses it aimlessly on trivia, short excitations of attention, and some curiosities and comedy. Let's take how-to videos on Facebook, for example. The algorithm in the feed, the name is indicative by the way, feed as in to feed, suggests a how-to video about, for example, how to assemble a table because it registered that you were looking for a table on Facebook Marketplace or on some other site on sale. You watch that video and as soon as it ends, another video starts about assembling some other piece of furniture and then a video about solving some minor kitchen problem. And if you keep following that sequence of videos that automatically play, it's not long before you get to the how-to videos on how to cut a watermelon into slices in the most effective way and how to solve the problem of tiling corner floor surfaces. Although he will unexpectedly come across some things worthy of knowing by watching those how-to videos, after half an hour he will ask himself the question, why am I watching this when I don't need to know these things right now? The individual's curiosity simply consumed the food from the feed, and before it stopped passively consuming a series of recordings, perhaps an hour passed. After that he wonders, what was I actually doing during this time? Maybe he forgot what he had actually started looking for. In the field of sports, at least since the beginning of the last decade, there has been a noticeable trend of offering a large amount of content adapted to a short attention span in the form of highlight videos. After every soccer game from the major European leagues and every game from the NBA on YouTube, there will be several highlight clips lasting 2 to 5 or less often in the case of slightly longer highlight videos, 8 or even 10 minutes. That is only for those who are patient. The good sides of the availability of a lot of content through a personal device with an internet connection are the diversification and democratization of content, independence from TV channels and their editorial policy, and the democratization regarding the possibility of creating and marketing content. Anyone with a smartphone can record a video and upload it to YouTube or to social networks. The availability of free Wi-Fi connection in almost all places, cafes, bars, restaurants, hotels, has led to the emergence of the practice of sitting in a place with your smartphone or laptop. An individual with a small device that connects to news portals, YouTube, social networks, which allow him to communicate with a multitude of known and many more unknown persons at any time, through the network of the bar or cafe in which he is sitting, does not need to socialize in the place he is in. Before the proliferation of Wi-Fi access and mobile devices with a network card, that is only 15 to 20 years ago, an individual who would go to a bar by himself would take a book or a magazine with him, objects that could offer an opportunity for interaction with other guests. In doing so, the specificity and limitation of the content of these content mediums allowed people around the individual who is reading them to enter into a relationship with that content. They can notice, for example, the title of the book on the cover. Maybe the title is familiar to them. Maybe they have heard of that book, or maybe they did not. In any case, the title tells them something and maybe arouses their interest. Even if no one in that bar has or cafe has met him before, that individual is not completely unknown because he is associated with a certain activity known for several thousand years. The activity of reading a text on a paper, whatever the character of the text may be, a novel, a historical study, a weekly magazine, daily newspaper, etc. In that environment, in doing that, he is known at least as a reader. An individual sitting in the same cafe with a smartphone connected to the internet, on the other hand, is a much more recent phenomenon. Only 15 years ago, he was a rare occurrence. 20 years ago, that did not exist. Although he can read on such a phone, he is not a reader. What is he? He is someone who browses, scrolls, clicks, and occasionally types, that is, enters letters via a virtual keyboard. He is therefore a browser. He is a scroller and a clicker. But regarding the type of the activity that these actions are directed at, that is the content that these actions are directed at, he is unknown. Due to the unfathomable, unimaginably large amount of diverse content that is available to him from the moment of connection, he is in terms of the type of his activity unknown to his surroundings. Unless they are indiscreet enough to get close enough to him to see the content on his phone's 6-inch screen, the people in his environment have no way of knowing the nature of the content he is directed at: text, video, photo, a GIF, or a meme. Does he switch from one newspaper article to another? Does he follow the course of some shares on the stock market? Is he watching videos on YouTube? If so, on which topics? Is he reading posts on social networks? If so, about what? Each of those content repositories on the internet, or more precisely the World Wide Web, however, contains an amount of content that is hundreds and thousands of times greater than what fits in a single book that the reader, which I discussed earlier, is directed at. If an individual with a mobile computer device with a touchscreen occasionally scrolls slowly, we can assume that he is reading something on that device. But there is no cover, no visible physical form of the text. Its physical form are the electric impulses invisible to observers. However, whether it is about daily news, posts on Twitter, messages on WhatsApp, some digitized book, reports from the stock market remains unknown. If he is scrolling, occasionally typing something on the virtual keyboard and then clicking, we can assume he is watching videos. But the question is, on which topic? Is he watching short videos with animals, which the internet is flooded with? Is he watching clips from talk shows? Of what type? On which topics? Is he watching movie trailers or sports highlights? The character of the content to which that individual with a mobile computing device is directed at remains unknown to his environment. He remains the, quote, bearer of a subjective world, as Husserl wrote. Due to the non-transparency of the content on which his attention is directed, his activity does not provide a reason for the environment to interact with him. He remains a stranger to his surroundings, just as he was when he first entered that bar. In cases where there are several individuals whose attention is focused on the World Wide Web in the premises, it is not unusual for them to make up half of the guests in a place. They actually form a community of isolated individuals, monads one could say, who do not interact with people in their environment except when they order a drink and ask what is the Wi-Fi password. But only with the World Wide Web, where they are present as owners of Google, Facebook and Twitter accounts and their online avatars, username, nickname, their likes and other reactions and comments. An individual with a book or a magazine, due to the limitation of that type of content, may get bored with it, in which case he will put it down at least for a while and become more available, and perhaps by that very act more open, for interaction with other guests in the place he is located in. The digital individual with his device, on the other hand, has an endless amount of content at his disposal. How can he be bored? He gets bored with one text, he moves to another. He gets bored with one video, scrolls on. He gets bored with one podcast, he plays another one. The people around him being equipped with a processor, memory, and flow of information that cannot be approached by those who have a computer connected to the internet come into consideration only as a last resort in case of unavailability of internet access. I remember a post in a group on a social network one time in which a user wrote, "I won't have internet access tonight. Let me know if anyone wants to meet in a cafe." An individual with a smartphone on which he scrolls and browses through a multitude of mostly small-scale content dulls his receptivity and shortens its range. As less and less content satisfies him as a result, he, like an addict, continues to move from one content to another while becoming less and less truly receptive to the world outside of the internet, the physical, social, and spiritual world with its relations that are not accessed via URL and the HTTP protocol. A digital individual checks his email and social networks of which he is a user at least 15 times a day, making sure that he does not miss something important, a post, comment, news, or video. It is interesting that, on the other hand, he does not worry that he might miss something important in the world outside of the internet. An individual who receives a large amount of internet content necessarily has less space, due to the limitations of human attention and memory, for the reception of content from the physical and social world of his environment.